Hi there. This is a little short clip on the opening scene of Othello. A lot happens in this opening scene. A lot is established in this opening scene that really characterizes what happens in the play as a total. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of it in 15 minutes, but I'll try and hit some of those high notes for you in this little clip. What I'm hoping that you're bringing with you is some the work on the context of the play. So hopefully you're coming with a little bit of understanding of representations of race. So hopefully you've had a look at the Lea Africanus kind of portrait of the Moor. Hopefully we've got an idea about this notion of the city-states of Venice and Florence and that kind of world of the Renaissance. Hopefully you've got a good understanding of gender roles, and I think you may remember that in our very first lesson together that I talked about how this is going to be a problematic play for some of you, and we're going to have to talk about that. The play establishes some really important questions about race, depictions of race, depictions of gender, depictions of social class. Certainly, jealousy is one of the themes of this play that's most often looked at. But this play it's about power, it's about gender, and there's some really interesting questions to be asked about whether this is a domestic drama kind of under the guise of a tragedy, or if this is a tragedy under the guise of a domestic drama, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about that later. But let's jump right in to this play, knowing that I have a very short time to talk to you about the opening scene of this play. So the opening scene, we begin in conflict, we begin in chaos, we begin in confusion, and this is really how the rest of the play goes. This idea of conflict, confusion, chaos, really reaches the fore, and certainly by Act 3, the climax of the play. Othello will be cast into a world of chaos and confusion, and he'll be led there very deliberately by Iago. So it's very fitting that our play opens in media res. We open mid-conversation that's happening between two characters, and one of those characters is obviously our antagonist Iago, and of course this kind of foolish character of Roderigo. That we open mid-conversation. It's quite confusing. We don't immediately know what they're talking about, but we find out very quickly that they're kind of talking about three characters who form the triangle of this play, if you will. And Iago becomes the very careful and very clever puppet master of all these characters. He's such a fascinating villain, and he's going to hint at some reasons why he hates Othello, which is established in this opening scene. But the reasons and the motivations for the actions that he undertakes and exactly what he does in basically causing chaos through this entire world, and it touches every character within the play, those motivations are somewhat ambiguous, and they're a point of debate, and they're a point of interest, and they're one of the reasons why this is the most performed play. Iago is a fascinating Machiavellian manipulative character, and we learn that from the moment we're in Act 1, and it's a curious thing, and it's one of the things I find most fascinating about this play is that the intimate relationship that the audience has is actually with Iago. We have the most soliloquies with him. We're drawn into his web. So what does that mean for us as an audience? What does that mean for us with our relationship with the tragic hero when our most intimate relationship is with our antagonist? So let's learn some more about him. Let's learn about what he does. Let's see if we can get to the heart and start working out at least what he tells us are his motivations compared to what they seem to be. So again, we find ourselves in a world of chaos, conflict, confusion. Really important. And we start as we mean to go on. So the two men are engaged in a frustrated and angry conversation. And we learn very quickly that both men are failures, which is interesting. Rodrigo has been pursuing Desdemona. He has engaged the assistance of Othello, and he has failed in that pursuit, because we learn that Othello, who is never named, and that will become very important, he's never named in this opening scene, that he has married Desdemona, and Rodrigo has failed in his pursuit. Why is he angry with Iago? Well, he wants to know if Iago had any conception that this was happening. And of course, we learned that Iago's relationship with Othello is a servant-master relationship through the military. He's a captain, and Othello is his master. Iago has failed in the sense that he has been trying to achieve a military promotion, and he has lost out in that, which brings us to the third character that is part of their conversation, which is Michael Cassio, who is a Florentine who has been promoted by Othello into that position that Iago has been trying to pursue. So we open with these two frustrated and angry characters who have failed in their pursuit, and they're speaking about particularly the two male characters in very crude and derogatory terms. So this idea of gender gets established pretty quickly in their discussion of Michael Cassio. He's described in very effeminate terms. They establish very quickly that he's not skilled in the art of war in the way that Iago is. He sees this man as less than he in terms of his military prowess, and of course he suggests that a spinster knows more of the art of war than this kind of arithmetic, or this man skilled in arithmetic. This Michael Cassio who is not a warrior in the sense that Iago believes himself to be. So there are those very derogatory descriptions we get of Michael Cassio, and you'll see them running through. But of course, the most interesting derogatory descriptions are those of Othello, which again establishes those questions about race, about the depictions, and the fact that Othello is never named as Othello in this opening scene. He's always referred to as the Moor, and these descriptions and these epithets of him become increasingly more sinister as they go through. So we begin with talking about the Moor. He's then described as thick lips. He's then described as the lascivious Moor. This idea that a sexually devious man, very sinister. And then of course they take on a much more racial approach. This opening scene is excellent for quotes, and you'll get many of them, and of course one of the play's most famous quotes comes from this opening scene, where when these two characters make the choice to go and wake up Brabantio. So Iago sees an opportunity here, and in this kind of puppet master scheme, convinces Rodrigo to go and wake up Desdemona's father, and tell him that his daughter has been taken from him. You'll see again that those problematic questions about gender are raised, and just even in their descriptions of Desdemona to her father, where they talk about her being, or that he has been robbed. So Desdemona is clearly described as a clear possession, which again, context and values of the time speaks to how fathers view daughters, the positions of women, the fact that marriage was an economic proposition in this time is something that we can talk about. And of course it raises this in part, and of course other things that happen within this opening scene, those questions about power, those questions about gender, those questions about race, social class. So you will read plenty of things that will tell you, oh, this is a play about jealousy, and yes, of course it is, but don't forget the dynamics of power that conducted here, the questions about gender, questions about race, and of course questions about social hierarchy that are quickly and very firmly established. So going back again to those crude descriptions. So by the time we're with Brabantio, and the two men are informing him that he has been robbed of his daughter, those descriptions of Othello change into something very, very bestial. We have a lot of bestial imagery. And of course, that most famous line from the play that now, very now, and the old black ram, of course, Othello, is tupping the white ewe. And right there and then, you've got that first establishment of the antithesis that carries on throughout the play of dark and light, which is also a continuing motif. They go on to describe Othello as being like a Barbary horse, and that while he's making the beast with two backs, Brabantio is actually under threat of his daughter giving birth to horses. Genets are small Spanish horses, and so this idea that if Brabantio doesn't act now, his grandchildren will neigh to him. So that continuation of that bestial imagery, and of course, given the religious connotations or the religious context of the play, we see him described as Othello described as a devil in the scene as well. So we have this mixture of these very crude derogatory descriptions around race that occur within that. And of course, if you've read the Leo Africanus article, you will have a nice understanding of that. Where, we need to also then talk about, and as interesting as it is to talk about just Othello, our real interesting part is talking about Iago here, because this is where these ideas, we can talk about the themes of the play, we can talk about those antitheses. Well, here we have, the servant and the master. We have notions of honesty and dishonesty, both between the father and daughter, Brabantio and Desdemona. But certainly Iago establishes very quickly here that he is going to act in pretense, and that pretense carries on for quite a long time. This idea, this theme, I think, of seeming happens throughout the play, and so then we end up with this really nice motif which supports that theme of this idea of seeing or not seeing as going through the play. So that gives us some nice lines from Iago, where he tells us, or he tells Rodrigo that he very much intends to take on a pretense. He has to look like he loves the more. And there's a lovely line here where he says, I follow him to serve my turn upon him. And of course, the nice pun in there, this idea of serving the master due to that military relationship, but that he intends to serve some revenge on him. And whether that revenge is just a case of Iago's pride is a point of discussion and a point of debate that we can get into later. But of course, we have these lovely depictions of the power of Iago's motivation. He's very easily able to extract from Rodrigo the actions that he wants to undertake. He's able to create chaos. And again, remember I said that that chaos and conflict and confusion is very firmly established in this opening scene. And we see how Iago very, very cleverly manipulates people into doing that. And, I want you to have a look at the way that Iago describes Othello. And then when we actually end up meeting Othello, whether those descriptions match, because I think that's something that's really important and really of interest. But we have Iago that establishes that he's going to act a certain way, that he's going to establish himself as honest while undertaking acts of dishonesty. He says, I am not what I am, which is a lovely description, and that in following him I follow myself. So all this idea of appearance versus reality is very firmly established there. You also have in this opening act some nice some establishment of this idea of poison, and certainly they go and speak poison to Brabantio, but Iago will continue this play, espousing poison, and then throwing both Desdemona and Othello's world into chaos, as well as Cassio's world there. And this, this idea of corruption permeates the play, and again, it's all nicely coupled with this theme of appearance versus reality, this motif of seeing and not seeing, these kind of contextual values which are espoused through the antitheses, as well as all the bestial imagery. So I hope that gives you something to talk about with Act 1.